You're listening to Field Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavier, Scott Caulfield with you. It is September. Happy September, everybody, as we've wrapped up August, and Indiana's 1-0 in the record books. They pick up their first win of the season as they knock off Florida International yesterday at Memorial Stadium. We are going to talk in depth about that game and about some of our reflections from what we saw in the game. And Scott, overall, really kind of a perfect day, a little sunny at times, which was, I think, a little unexpected given how the day started off. But a pretty good start to the new era here, the Curt Cignetti era at IU. And just nice to have football back, nice to be back in the stadium. It did feel good having been, out of it and all this anticipation that's built over the course of the spring and the summer. It was nice to finally actually be in the midst of it all.
Yeah, and see a team doing something that was different. And it was funny for us because, we have season tickets, had them for years with two younger kids, taking them to the games. We kind of checked out last year and didn't go to a lot of games. So being back, it's like, wow, it's like really, I feel like we haven't been here in 2 years, even though we went to a couple of games last year. It just didn't feel like we had been there a while. Some new changes in Memorial Stadium, some new food vendors. They've done some upgrades, which are very well needed. But no, it was great to be back, and great way to end the day with a win.
Yeah, it was really nice. And we'll talk about some of the game day experience stuff towards the tail end of the podcast today. First, though, we wanted to remind everybody that we're part of the Back Home Network here at Crimson Cast, and the Back Home Network is brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, the place to go now, not just for T-shirts or hoodies or bomber jackets, but they have new coaching jackets. Scott, I know you saw these. There's an Indiana one. If you ever wanted to look like John Pont, like now's the time. Really, really cool looking design. Really great idea. Like not an idea that I had pegged for home field, but the good brand continues to come up with some great options. And this looks absolutely like the next in the latest line of things that will be hanging in my closet in short order.
I'll be getting one. I look through them. They're awesome. I mean, I'm not a huge Notre Dame fan. The Notre Dame one looks awesome, and they all look like they could be in a positive way. They look like they could be on the set for Dazed and Confused. It just looks like straight out of there, and they are all awesome. They really are. It's a great look.
So you can go to homefieldapparel.com or follow them on social media. Find out more information about not just the bomber jackets, but the rest of the collection from Home Field Apparel. Go ahead and check them out. It is, if you use the code HOME23, you get 15% off your first order. That'll let them know that we sent you. And if you've already ordered from them, as many of you have, you maybe just tell them that you heard about them on Crimson Cast. I'm sure they'd like to know that. But
we joke about just put in codes, put in Home 23, see what happens. Put in Home 24, put in Cignetti 24, 9-win Indiana. Just throw codes in, see what happens.
The folks at Home Field frighteningly do listen to Scott.
Yeah.
And so you never know. You might hit the right code and
talk to Connor. He's joked like maybe I will just put a random code in there that's just like winning the lottery. It makes like the Vegas sound like ding 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 ding. He's just like
here's 10 bomber jackets. I know it's
all the coaches' jackets with
anyway. Homefieldapparel.com, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network. Reminder, we are also on Substack. Go to crimsoncast.substack.com. You can subscribe, get podcasts sent right to your inbox. It's free, and it's our way of allowing you to know what's going on in the world of Crimson Cast without necessarily having to track the socials on a regular basis. We also have some nice back and forth with the community on there, and we had a nice thread about our season predictions for IU football. Some people agreed, some people did not agree, which is great. But you can do all that on the Substack. Again, free to sign up. There is a subscriber option for pay if you want to support the podcast monetarily. We try to stuff some extra things in that basket and send those folks, occasionally, about every 2 weeks, some extra stuff. So again, crimsoncast.substack.com. Go ahead and check it out. And we appreciate you joining the community. Almost 1,000 people now in the Crimson Cast Substack community. So, Scott, let's go ahead and dive into what we've got going on today. We'll recap the game. And let's just start with that process. Indiana picking up their first win of the season. And that in and of itself is not abnormal. I mean, outside of years where Indiana has to open with like Ohio State, IU has pretty traditionally won their first game of the season. But there was a lot of intrigue around this one, obviously, purely because it's the first game for Curt Cignetti as head coach. It's the first game for most of his assistant coaches at IU. It's the first game for a lot of players, including some key players. And everybody, I think, was kind of curious what they were going to be getting out of this IU team. And I tell you, everybody had to feel really good over those first 30 or so minutes of the game, 25 minutes maybe, where it just looked like Indiana was going to dominate the entire game in both phases. The offense was both crisp, but also methodical. It was clear they were trying things out. The defense was swarming and really creating problems for FIU. FIU, as we talked about in our preseason podcast, not a good team, maybe the worst team in FBS, depending, at least as far as preseason predictions go. But, we saw teams struggle in these last 2 weeks with FCS opponents, with other opponents. Anytime you can kind of throttle an opponent the way Indiana was throttling them in the first half, that's a real positive thing to look at. And I certainly was vibing in a very positive way in the stands there, Scott, as we entered that last possession of the first half. I was like, this is about as good as I could have possibly scripted it.
I agree. It's funny. I was trying to think of like, how can I be a little more objective? Because I came away really positive with what I saw. And the thing is, it's one of those where you look at the score, the final score of, 31-7 doesn't exactly look like what Purdue won, like 56-0 or, 50-0 or 60-7, like one of those kind of scores. We've beaten Indiana State in years, like, 73-7. And those are games where you look at the score like, oh my God, that must have been a throttling. This is one where the score didn't really reflect how much we were just kind of dominating Florida International.
Right.
It was 21-0. They had done nothing on offense. In the first half, they were showing, in the stadium, there was like, 100, 200 yards to 12 or like 14. Like Florida National had done nothing. There were a couple of mental lapses. They had the one drive where they got the touchdown, but then, Indiana kind of came back and put everything together and continued to throttle them again. And, it was really impressive to see, especially on the defensive end. And then we'll talk about the offense as well. The offense, in my mind, and again, I'm looking at this from a very positive lens, it looked really good, even though you could tell they were doing really vanilla stuff. They were kind of running the same 3 or 4 runs every single time, but they were getting yards out of it. They were moving the ball around. So,
Right.
no, to me, it was a unbelievably impressive showcase for a team that really looked like they were not bringing everything they had to offer in the game.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, and I've been trying to track some of the post-game commentary and, both from media and from folks in the Twitterverse and elsewhere. And I think if you were going in expecting Indiana to just like dominate offensively, as we saw like Ole Miss do last night playing against Furman, or, as we saw some teams doing this weekend, you probably left disappointed. I saw a couple of people's comments like, well, this looks like more of the same. And it's like, well, it wasn't like an offensive showcase. And I think we do need to talk about some of the struggles that the offense was clearly having and what those were and like what the nature of them was. But I look at it from the standpoint of, I think if you were going in expecting Indiana to just wallop FIU, that was not a reasonable expectation because of how new this mesh of personnel was for Indiana on both sides of the ball. And you've got new coaches, you've got new players, and you're playing against live competition for the first time. There were certainly some things that needed to be cleaned up, at least on offense. But I will say that in terms of like being positive, a lot of people are expecting to be won over, I think, by being hit over the head with Indiana being really good. I think this is going to be an incremental process, and it's why having these first 2 games of the season being against FIU and then Western Illinois is really important, because I think it was clear yesterday, especially on offense, that this team is going to need some time to round into shape as far as being a really efficient group. The pieces all look like they're there, but they don't seem to have the timing. They don't seem to yet have the command of what all they're doing and their teammates are doing play by play. That's really how it felt on a lot of the penalties. It felt that way on a lot of the drops that we saw. And I think you listen to Curt Cignetti's comments afterwards, and he was clearly frustrated with the number of points or the number of big plays that IU left on the board just through mistakes that they made on their own, as opposed to being forced by FIU. Those are good things to have in a first game where you win anyway by 24 points, because it's like, well, hey, we won and we've still got a ton of things we got to work on. I think that's almost the ideal stew for a team like this coming out of week one.
So one Cignetti thought I'd like to share at this point, and this is, there's no other way to talk about it than to contrast where we were, but I'm not here to relitigate to talk about Tom Allen, but it is just, you have to, for me, it's like, I cannot not notice the difference. I was watching Cignetti a lot on the sideline, just because last year I didn't want to look at Allen in the last couple of years as much, but he was hard to not look at because every time something happened, it was either total exuberance or complete despair. And he would be slapping helmets and going nuts, or he'd be screaming and yelling. And it was like highs, just complete peaks and valleys, high and low, high and low. I was really struck by how professional Cignetti was on the sideline and how the team reacted as such. I was also really interested to see, when there would be a timeout and the offense was gathering, Cignetti was not in there. He might stick his head in and say one or two things. Yeah. He would then pull back and just kind of walk down the sideline. And it's like, oh, you're letting your coaches coach. Like, you're letting your offensive coaches coach the offense. You're letting your defenses coaches, coach the defense. And, there was one play where we had like a, false start and he was pissed and he just kind of walked up and down the sideline, came down and, yelled at a player. But I do think it was really refreshing to see a coach kind of have a firm grip on the team, not letting them get too high, too low. And, you felt it it was very much, we get up 21-0, Florida International is up, they score, they start the second half with the ball. And in other situations we've had, it's like you could feel that the team tense up in previous years. Like, oh my God, like if they score here, it's 21-14, like, half the fans are gone. Like, this is not going to be good. You never felt that. It's like, all right, it's almost like a cat playing with his food a little bit. And it's like, all right, well, now we're just going to go ahead and we'll continue to throttle them now and we'll be done with this. And you never felt the team get too high or too low, but it was definitely, you felt it coming all from Cignetti on the way he was handling himself on the sideline, which is just such a change from what we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, his propensity for just standing by himself. This was pointed out by several friends of mine. I was sitting on the side of the IU bench and didn't really have a great angle, so I wasn't really paying attention. But the people who were like, yeah, it's really interesting watching where Cignetti's standing, how he's reacting, and what I thought was great, just kind of in general, about how Cignetti approached the game was, again, as you said, it was a very workmanlike approach, but it was also one of those approaches where he was clearly very frustrated by a lot of the mistakes. And even in the post game, like his post game interviews were pretty no BS. It was like, well, we got, we played okay, but we've got a lot of work to do on these things, and I'm frustrated by this. I think part of the issue with Allen a lot of times was it really did feel in press conferences and in interviews that he was unwilling to lean into the idea his team really needed to do a lot better, like with specifics. And Cignetti clearly had a lot of those things in his mind already. Like he had standards that he was trying to uphold, even with a game like this, where the game was largely out of reach within the first half. Now, I think Indiana's got a ways to go, and we were very curious coming into this game, Scott, about where Indiana was at in terms of that development and meshing process. And I think, it'll be interesting because I'm sure some people will seize on what happened in this game and say, well, this isn't really what we were hoping for. We were hoping for more. But there was an alternate scenario here. Let me try speaking in English. There was an alternative scenario here where IU looked like absolute garbage for 3 quarters, kind of like Wisconsin did against Western Michigan earlier on this week, where you're just like, uh-oh, this really could be bad. And I never got the sense at any point that Indiana was ever in trouble in this game. It's more like, okay, there's some things they're not doing yet or not able to do yet. But I never got the sense like, wow, they got a lot of fixing they've got to do. It's more tweaking and finalizing execution as opposed to oh my God, there's like tremendous problems here that need to be addressed. And that's, for a new coach with this many new players, especially this many new players in key spots, I'm actually a little bit buoyed by how far along they are, especially on defense. And, there's even little tweaks. This was, I thought, a really good point from, if you're not subscribed to Bite Size Bison, folks, we're going to just annoy you all season about subscribing. But Taylor did a good job of writing out his initial thoughts, looking at some of the advanced statistics. And one of the things that he noted was that Indiana, I'm going to quote the newsletter here, Indiana was fantastic in run defense, particularly keeping dual threat quarterback Keon Jenkins contained. Part of this was because compared to Tom Allen's defensive scheme, the linebackers were actually available to spy. There were like little things like that where there were play breakdowns or it got to the second level. And normally, like, we've gotten used the last couple of years to being like, okay, well, now there's real trouble. Now Indiana's got a problem. But then there was always somebody there, it felt like, to clean things up. And even offensively, there's the pass blocking could have been a lot better. But the flip side of that is, for a team that is not necessarily run first, this team looked amazing running the football all game. Last year and the year before, with Indiana trying to establish a running mentality, they never looked anywhere close to this good running the ball. And I think that, these are the kinds of things where it's like, I think people are going to dwell on the negatives, but to rack up over 230 rushing yards, which I think it was, and to really just look like they could have moved the ball whenever they wanted running the ball, I'm not used to that. Like, that, we got to go back to like Tevin Coleman, Divine Redding era IU for me to really feel like we were at a time when we had that kind of running attack.
No, and you talk about this being kind of the perfect way to win. Again, they were never really threatened. I watched that Michigan State game Friday night, and like, there's a team that with a new coach where they could have lost that game. They're like 3 plays away from losing that game, also having like 12 targeting penalties. It's like Michigan State's just ready to take your head off at all times. But that was, they could have lost to Florida Atlantic. And, this is a situation where IU has made enough mistakes and looked non-crisp enough to give Cignetti enough to work with. But it wasn't like, now, oh my God, we really got to get together. Like, this looks like a team that should win 3 of their first 4 games. UCLA we'll talk about separately, but it looks like the other 2 kind of quote unquote gimme games should be wins now. So now it's like, all right, we can breathe a little easier. Because that wasn't the case for Indiana last year with Akron. Like, we've had issues with this before. I'm not saying it's going to happen. And, what happens this season will kind of reflect back on this game as to whether this is a mirage or it's just like, well, FIU sucked and, we weren't that good. But all we can look at is right now. The thing that I looked at from offense in this game is, we've had a couple of years, like you said, of it looks like Indiana's trying to get the running game going with just runs right up the middle. And you'd run it up the middle and you would get nothing, or you'd get a yard. And that was always so frustrating to me. And it also didn't work, by the way, just side note, never worked in the red zone, because we'd be first and goal from the 1, and we'd run 4 times in the red zone and we would lose and we wouldn't get a touchdown. This year, so this game, obviously we're keeping a lot, they kept a pretty vanilla playbook. They ran a lot of RPOs, but first off, they didn't run them right up the middle. They ran them to the side. But I thought it was interesting that even for a team where you could tell, like, it was like, we're just kind of trying to run some plays to kind of get things going, they were still getting 2, 3, 4 yards every time they ran an RPO. And sometimes they would break it. I mean, they finished the game, you mentioned, with 239 rushing yards. They averaged 6.2 rushing yards a play. Or 6.2, rushing yards a play. I went back and looked, like, Akron last year, just one example, like, they were like 4.2 yards a play. And that's a huge difference when you're, 2nd and 6 instead of 2nd and 10, having just gotten slammed. I was very impressed by that, because my thing is, like, I think they were running the same 2 or 3 RPO plays every single time, which is fine. You're not going to open up your playbook, but they obviously have a different playbook, because they had the one flea flicker in the red zone where it was the halfback threw it for the guy was wide open for a touchdown, but he threw it like 5 yards short.
Right.
They have some crazy plays in there. They're just not going to pull them all out here for FIU. But that's the thing that I was most impressed by, is that, in previous years, even against subpar opponents, when we would try and get the run game going, we really couldn't get it going like we were doing yesterday, even when we were kind of running the same type of running actions every day, every play.
I know it's easy to, essentially not take the statistics that you rack up against FIU seriously. But Indiana last night, so the official rushing the average per rush, 40 carries, 234 yards, 5.85 yards per rush. The last time IU had that good of a rushing attack was the game at Michigan State in 2022, that bizarre game. And a lot of that was like Jalen Lucas breaking that huge run where they chunked up like 80 yards. The last time they had that high of a total against anybody was against Idaho. But if you go back and try to find a game where Indiana rushed for more than 5.85 yards against an FBS opponent, you actually, believe it or not, have to go all the way back to 2019 when Indiana played Rutgers, when they averaged 6.84 yards per carry. So,
and this is without anybody really breaking a lot of like 80-yard runs or anything.
Yeah, that was the thing. I mean, what was impressive, I think, yesterday about the way the rushing attack worked was that it was a lot of 5 to 6 yard gains, but it was pretty consistent. And they had a couple that were better than that, obviously, and that was nice to see. But I just look at it and I'm like, you look at the mix,
which is something I feel like we just haven't had for years. Like it's like we will just run it up the middle, we get stopped, and then like our rushing comes from like when there's just a complete breakdown, and then we have an 80-yard run. And like you really didn't see that. Like you saw a team that looked like they knew how to run to the holes, make blocks, and make openings, because 5 or 6 yard runs to me consistently is almost more impressive than getting 180-yard run, because that's normally just a blown coverage or somebody made a mistake that you can't help on every single game.
Right. The other thing that I think is impressive is that Indiana had 3 players with, I'm going to take Curtis Rourke out of this because all of his runs were essentially either scrambles or sacks, but 3 running backs with at least 5 yards, 3 running backs with at least 50 yards, 5 carries, 50 yards. So Elijah Green, 5 carries for 82 yards and a touchdown. Tyson Lawton, 16 carries, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns. Justice Ellison, 10 carries, 68 yards. So to be able to spread it out, and I'll note all 3 of those players were not here last year. Elijah Green transfers in from North Carolina, 5th-year player. Tyson Lawton came from James Madison, but he was at Stony Brook for 3 years before that. And then Justice Ellison was at Wake Forest for the last 4 years before coming here. And, these are all essentially, this is Indiana's rushing attack right now. So even that, it's like, well, here's 3 capable ball handlers, 3 guys that you can give the ball to, 3 guys who I think everybody was wondering, how are they going to fit into this attack? And I still don't think we know, but for all 3 of them to be that effective when Indiana has struggled to have any running backs being effective for any length of time in some of the previous seasons, that was good to see.
The other thing on the offense I'll mention, so we're driving down, we're listening to your preview with Taylor from Bite Size Bison. So the second time we'll try and get like five mentions in a podcast, because Taylor is awesome. And as is Bite Size Bison, but like I'm like asking the boys, my oldest son is starting to get into podcasts. He likes like NBA, he's an NBA guy, likes NBA podcasts. I'm like, hey, do you want to listen to a preview for this game? And he's like, yeah. He's like, is it the podcast you're on? I was like, well, yeah, but I'm not on it. And we start playing. He's like, oh, that's your buddy Galen. He's like, he sounds really chill. He's a good podcaster. I was like, he doesn't. You haven't been to a game with Galen. Like Galen's not chill in a game.
I will say I have new seats this year, as I do every year, mostly because of my lack of chill in the stadium. But I was pretty chill in this game, and I'm fortunate in that there's at least 3 people in my section who are significantly louder than I am right now.
There's still early. The season's early, my friend.
I am trying to take a new approach in the stadium. I really am. I need to chill out more and just to relax. And I'm new era. I'm going to try to dial it down. Just going to try to vibe with what's going on in the stadium. The only time I got mad, like really mad the whole game, was that ridiculous roughing the passer penalty that they called in the first quarter, I think it was. Like that was worth yelling about. But the rest of it, your son is correct. I'm actually very chill now. This is
James. So James thinks you're chill. James is definitely a fan of chill Galen.
This is the one love era of Galen Clavio.
But you and Taylor were talking about kind of lamenting the days when we would pass to tight ends and we would pass the ball around. And then it was great to see, you look at the receiving, how that was passed around. There's 7 receivers who got receptions yesterday, 3 of which Zach Horton, our tight end, great little plays for 36 yards, a touchdown. And, again, I'm reading into this. I'm very positive with what I'm seeing. but it felt like they ran those plays to Horton, and it's like, oh, those work. Like, all right, we're done doing that. Like, we're not going to do any more of that and show that on tape. Like, we'll save that for UCLA or Big Ten, because all three of his plays, he was wide open. It was like he was just wide open. But it was really nice to see us pass the ball around, pass to a tight end, have a passing attack that seemed to be calculated, as opposed to just kind of throwing it to wherever we can, while we're trying to get it out.
Yeah, no, one of the things that stuck out to me just in general about the game was everything felt competent and measured.
Yes.
And it's a hard thing. And I think for many people, it's likely to be something that they don't acknowledge, because I think, I'm trying to think of how to delicately put this. A lot of people don't carefully watch the games, and I don't blame them, because I mean, you really have to watch a lot of football over a long period of time, and I think be focused on like what the full equation is supposed to look like with it, and most fans are just not armed to do that. And it took me a long time to even get to the point where I felt close to doing that, but I was really happy with how this was not like, let's throw the kitchen sink at everybody and try to like show how much we can do. It really did feel like, especially after the second touchdown drive, and really even the second touchdown drive itself, it was like, we're not going to just go down the field. Let's try all these things out, like you were saying. Let's see what works. Let's see how we're doing. And, I think there were clearly things that needed to be fixed with that, and the penalties were a big one. I actually think Indiana could have rushed for like 400 yards in this game if they wanted to, but they purposefully ended some drives preliminarily because they were trying to get their passing game working, and they were trying to see what they could do. And look, I think some people, a lot of the messages I got from good football observers afterwards were like, well, Rourke still seems like a TBA. And I think we'll see. And it may be a situation where, maybe Rourke is a TBD in terms of how good he actually is. But I thought he looked good. I thought his fakes looked good. He had a very mechanical approach in the pocket, which I think will contribute well to making the RPOs sell better. He seems to have the arm. A lot of the balls that were put right where they needed to be were just dropped. There were several drops where, I think the first drop, I was like, well, that's too bad. By the third one, I was like, really? And then there was even one later in the game where, there was a nice completion, or should have been a completion, I think, to Miles Price over the middle that he dropped. And it's like, it's right there. I think that'll get fixed. But I'll also say, I think it was interesting how, if you look at the way the stats broke down, Indiana really did not try to target their best receivers very often. Donovan McCulley, I actually was texting with Taylor at one point during the game. I was like, has McCulley even been targeted yet? Now, literally, as I hit the send button, they threw the ball to McCulley, and he caught that ball for 9 yards. But I don't know if he got targeted again the rest of the game. Like, he was just kind of out there as part of the collection. Elijah Surratt, same thing.
With an injury, right? He was like not medically cleared.
Well, and it was right when that happened. He didn't come back. But but it was interesting with Surratt, the same thing, where it's like they were targeting different people. It was great to see Zach Horton, the tight end, the transfer from JMU, get in there and catch a couple of balls over the middle. And it was just cool to see the tight end position being used again. That was nice. But, they clearly were, there's more things they have to do with the passing attack. The blocking is going to have to get a little bit better. And I just think the timing is going to have to get better. And obviously the catches are going to have to be there. But overall, given that they didn't need to show anything else, I think people were hoping for maybe a bigger blowout. And I certainly love big blowouts in these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, they covered, they win 31-7, and they were in control the entire game. And a large part of that, Scott, I guess, to flip sides of the ball, was on the defense. And the defense really did look awesome. And I think what's really fascinating to me is most of the statistical leaders on the defensive side were not guys that were here last year. You go down the list. Aiden Fisher, transfer from JMU, led the team in tackles, had 12 total tackles, had 4 solo tackles, had a sack. He's a transfer from JMU. Jalen Walker, transfer from JMU. He was the second leading tackler. D'Angelo Pons, another transfer from JMU, third leading tackler. Sean Asbury, transfer from Old Dominion, was high on the list of tackles. Tyreek Tucker was a James Madison transfer. Like, the only guy in that list of tacklers that was here last year was Isaiah Jones, the linebacker. And he didn't play very much at all last year. He had 2 total tackles last year. He had 6. Sorry, that was 2 years ago. That wasn't even last year. So the import of talent really showed out early, and there were guys I think that we were expecting to see play that just didn't get much play at all in this game. Now, there was a big play made by one of the walk-ons in this game. It's really interesting, like how there's a tiered system, it appears already, in terms of who Cignetti's going to play on defense, what players are getting opportunities, what schemes are being run. And I think it's just revealing with so many players that were on the team last year. Most of the statistical standouts came from people who weren't on the team last year.
Yeah. No, I mean, and the defense was swarming. I was going to say there probably is a stat for this now, but the thing that I was very happy to see that had kind of gone away and is always my indicator of how well the IU defense is playing is there's the first defender who touches the other team tackle the guy. Because for so many years we've seen it where it's like you go and they go for the tackle and they grab him and it's like he just pulls away and then it's like he breaks 3 tackles, he's gone. Our first guy who tried to tackle was tackling most of the time, which is good. Right. But you look at, it's also the offense. The offense held the ball for a lot. But, FIU, their first 4 drives, it was 3 and out, -5 yards, 6 and out was 16 yards, 5 and out, 16 yards. They did get a touchdown in their last drive. They only had 4 drives in the first half. Only 1 drive in the second quarter. 12 yards. They only had 2 drives that had more than 10 plays. Yeah. And the second one that, one was a touchdown for 12 plays. The other one in the third quarter that had 10 plays was an interception. I mean, so their drive chart for Florida International was all under 10 plays. Indiana kept them off the offense, kept them from running any kind of drives, and everything was 3 and out or 6 and out. It was really a pretty stifling defense that had kind of 1 lapse, and that was it. No, it was impressive, and it like you, I love blowout wins, but it's kind of fun. I came home and then I watched UCLA and Hawaii, and no great shakes there. We're probably not going to see another blowout against Western Illinois. It does feel like this IU team is kind of keeping things close to the vest, but watching UCLA, it's like I watched that and it's like I don't see how they're much better or worse than we are.
Right. Yeah. UCLA looked pretty bad. Yeah. I mean, they had to really pull something out at the end there against Hawaii last night. I mean, here's the thing. I was thinking about this. Like, there were some teams that really did struggle quite a bit. There were others that did not. But I think for Indiana in particular, with its particular set of circumstances, it's a completely different equation from most of the other teams in the Big Ten. UCLA is a team that's kind of in the same boat as IU. I mean, you give them a little bit of credit because they were playing on the road, and that's a long flight to Hawaii, obviously. But they had some continuity, whereas IU's had very little continuity in terms of their coaching staff, in terms of the players that are out there. I mean, it's just like a brand new team out there. I mean, think about on offense too. It wasn't just the defense where I think something like 6 of the top 8 or 7 of the top 9 tacklers weren't here last year. But on offense, Curtis Rourke, starting quarterback, but wasn't here. Elijah Dream, Tyson Lawton, Justice Ellison, Miles Price, not here last year. Zach Horton, not here last year. Miles Cross, I don't believe was here last year. It was like Omar Cooper Jr., I think, is the only guy that was back out of the statistical leaders on offense. And
in the post-game radio, and I forget who they talked to, one of the players, a JMU transfer, and he was talking about how, like, we're trying to keep we're trying to push the JMU, ethos here at Indiana. Right. It's not like we're trying to push, Indiana on JMU. It's like, no, JMU's trying to push Indiana on, onto Indiana. So it really is an interesting spot. Like you said, I mean, it's 95% of the contributors in the game yesterday were not here last year.
And it wasn't just JMU people. I think this is the important thing, because they've dominated the conversation. But it's like the ACC guys and the MAC guys. Who was the other one that I saw? CJ West, who was at Kent last year. It's just, I think it's less the JMU ethos, as we've heard talked about, and like that level of work, that has been what they wanted to bring in. But it's also been just the basic concept of you're going to practice hard and you're going to bring it in practice, or you're not going to play. And it does kind of feel like there's some churn going on where it's like, well, if what we saw out there is an indication of who's playing hard in practice, and those are the people that got the opportunities. It does say a lot about the status of the roster that Cignetti took over and where they're still at in terms of trying to get all those people on the same page from an output perspective.
And this is, the last thing I'll say about, or not the last thing, but one of the last things I'll say about the game is, you saw it in the end of the game where, and again, it's a different talent, breakdown here, but you also have a team from Florida where they should be used to hotter, sunnier weather. It looked like Florida International was kind of just wilting and getting tired. And they were just kind of walking around on defense. We had one of our explosive, runs at that point. I think it's a good sign that, it felt like we were continuing to kind of almost like a snake, like constricting on that team. And it did look like if that, the game went another quarter, we would have won, 64-7. Like, it didn't look like Florida International was bringing anything more. Like, they were beat down. They were tired. It was nice to see that we were not tired. Obviously they're doing the right thing in the offseason, in the workouts, because we look like, I don't say we're getting stronger, but we look like we were keeping up the intensity throughout the entire game. And we definitely, broke and wore out Florida International, which, again, no great shakes. Maybe one of the worst teams we're going to play this year, but we still did it, and that was impressive.
So, Indiana, as they recap what goes on in this, there's clearly a lot of things that they'll want to fix. And the nice thing is they've got another week to fix those things.
Almost a week.
Well, I actually kind of like that even better because, they're going to have to do a short week, which means they're largely going to stick to, I'm guessing, many of the same things that they were planning on doing in this game. There'll be a weaker opponent that they'll play in this next game, which should allow them to do a little bit more in terms of getting timing down. And I think that's the thing. It was so many of the mistakes that were self-inflicted on offense were really, as I said earlier, they were detail-oriented things as opposed to, well, we can't execute against this FIU team.
Yeah.
And the defense just in general, I think that is a renewable resource when it comes to football. If your defense goes and shuts down the opposition in such a way, again, they'll have a lot of opportunities to try, I think, some different coverages out and some different approaches in what they're doing, but also maybe to get some more depth out there. And you'll also get an extra week where it's like, well, okay, you've seen we mean business when we talk about you're going to have to practice hard if you're going to be on this team. Again, it's like it's a gradual building of culture and a gradual changing of ethos. And for IU, I think that's so important because it was so clear in the last couple of years, really the last 3 years of the Allen era, that the culture, something in the culture had broken. And the level of output you were getting out of players was not just a matter of we're making mistakes. A lot of it was we're just not executing properly. And so you need this sharpening. And this is where this whole month of this whole month of September may end up being like, I don't know, there's been a more critical month in terms of an early trajectory of an IU team in a while. Like, we talked about this in our preview podcast where it's like, if you can get off to a good start and you can win while you're fixing things and getting things into shape, you really do set yourself up for a good rest of the season. If you can get through these first 4 games 4-0 or even 3-1 with a close loss, that's what I saw in the game against Florida International tells me that pathway is possible. I mean, we talked kind of, I don't want to say talking out of our butts or anything like that, but a lot of it was, well, we think this is how this is going to go. We'll see how it actually goes, but we hope that this is the direction and we're going to bank on that as being what happens. Well, having seen what we saw in this first game, with the caveat that there's still a lot to work on, it does feel like the trajectory that we've talked about is possible because, again, you look around college football and the Big Ten in particular, and I'm just not seeing the level of dominance from a lot of the other teams in the conference. And I think Indiana, there's a talent level there, and there's a mental approach that seems to be setting the scene for the ability to build on it as they move through the season. And that is about as much as you could have asked for, I think, coming out of the first game of this new era.
Yeah, I'll go back to something you said earlier that I definitely felt. It just felt professional and like a workman-like attitude. And, if you go back and look at some of, Cignetti's teams at James Madison, they ran a more dynamic offense than we saw yesterday. And so that's the other thing is like, I would be shocked if this is all we see from the offense all year. Like, we're going to see more. They definitely kept some stuff in reserve. And so, but no, I agree with you. And I look at this as like, all right, I walked away being like, all right, we're going to be 3-1 worst case going into game 4. which I don't think I felt as good about some of those gimme games the last couple of years,
right,
based on where the team was. And I'm with you. I think that's a good thing. And it also feels like, some of those kind of, announcer speak things that you hear, like, oh, the biggest improvement you see is from week 1 to week 2. It felt like we never really met those things in football. It's like, well, but not at IU. We don't seem to do that.
right.
It feels like maybe we are going to start doing some of those things, where like a real program has real improvement from week 1 to 2. Maybe we'll see that. Maybe we see it in week 3 against UCLA, but it does feel like, oh, we might be on the trajectory of a real football team. It's like Pinocchio, Galen. It's turned into a real boy. We have a real team. But no, it does feel like we might, again, I'll go back to something else. It feels like there's a steady hand on the wheel kind of leading this thing.
Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, you're not going to learn a lot new in terms of how good the team is on Friday. This is more about, all right, let's sharpen what we've got and figure out where things are at and try to avoid injuries. I mean, the only other things I'll note statistically that were worthwhile out of this game, no turnovers. That was nice. There were a couple of fumbles, but they weren't lost. They weren't even actually recorded as fumbles. You did get the one interception, which that was nice. So Indiana did turn FIU over once. The no turnovers thing is almost more important to me than the penalties. The penalties weren't great.
Yeah. 9
penalties, 80 yards, and just some sloppiness on the penalties. It also didn't help, frankly, that I'm not sure if any member of that officiating team had ever officiated a football game before. That was a struggle, and not just with bad calls. There were a few of those, but just like the basics of, hey, where should the ball be? Yeah. Or, hey, what was the clock supposed to be? Or that whole stupidity with the lateral towards the end of the game. Just like stuff like that, where I'm just like, what is going on with this crew? I will say, watching a lot of college football this weekend, that was a problem everywhere. It wasn't just limited here, but so I don't know how much of the penalties are actually penalties that wouldn't get called, but were in this case, and how many of it was something that actually needed to be fixed. But that is certainly something that they're going to need to have some improvement in.
It's maybe it's a good off-season pod. It's like, as all this stuff happens, all this money, all these conference changes and NIL and money, like at some point, maybe we have professional refs, like for a $2 to $3 billion industry that's putting out a product. Like maybe we don't have guys who are just, contracted and working 12 games. That's a totally different discussion. The other thing I would say is the numbers weren't, eye popping, but James Evan at punter, his punts, he only had 3 of them, but they were really high, as punts should be, but just he looked crisp, and the punting unit looked good. And it's something I listened to on your podcast coming down, just how special teams always seem to make a mistake along the way. We didn't have a special teams mistake yesterday either, and that was nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, just little things, little detail. And we talked about this for years with the Allen era. We talked about it with the Wilson era. We talked about it with the all the eras. The details are the devil for Indiana, and to watch Indiana have a pretty good day where what problems they had detail wise didn't really hurt that much, and they were able to do a lot of good things, especially with run blocking. I was so impressed with just the little subtle things that opened up holes in the run blocking game for IU. There's so much to build off of. I'm just really excited about it. So any final thoughts from you, Scott, or anything else that was worth noting in terms of the on-the-field play?
No, I want to talk atmosphere, but no, not on the field. No.
Let's talk atmosphere.
So I gotta say, I love the new section, the new student section where they moved to start the game. I told my wife, we were both like, this feels like a college game. Like, I've been to tons of games in Memorial Stadium. The way the students were before, it's just a slight change, just kind of moving the students to behind the end zone there on the north end. It felt louder. You could hear the students starting chants, and like it continued. It's going to be good. Like that's a really good change. I feel like the students have ownership over that section now. I was like, wow, this feels like a really loud student section that's way more involved by just kind of adding that little ribbon, because the other area is still there. I will also say, like, I don't understand how things work sometimes, my friend, because Marlboro is still a company that exists, that is a multi-billion-dollar company. They don't sell as many cigarettes in the U.S. The the student section shirt, the Cignetti with the Marlboro logo. For those of us who are old enough, it's like, oh, Penske and Marlboro. Like, I remember that logo. It's a great looking shirt. Like, I was like, that's awesome. I'm also like, I don't think IU got, permission from Marlboro to use the logo. Like, how was this possible without getting into a copyright infringement thing? Not that I want to be Captain Bring Down, but I mean, like, how does this stuff, how are you able to do this? Like, this is a big,
I'm going to, for those of you who are on the YouTube channel, I'm showing you what the shirt looked like, so you have some visual aid. And yeah, it is an absolute Marlboro ripoff. It looks like the top of a cigarette box.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, look, I love it. It looked awesome. It's fantastic. It's like, like Elio's first winning car in Indy. It's fantastic. But I see that and I'm like, do you want to use the Disney font too and just go for like pissing off everybody who can sue you? But I love it. It was awesome. It's a great start. But no, the student section where they were was awesome. The crowd at the beginning of the game, it was a really good feel. That probably the best feel for a game of that kind of opponent I can remember in a long time. I word it that way because obviously, like, in that first games we played Ohio State a couple times, like that's a great crowd. But just for kind of a nondescript first opponent, that was a pretty fired up crowd.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't a huge crowd. I mean, the announced attendance was, I think, 44,000 something. There were definitely not many people in the southeast corner of the stadium, and the attendance was even a little bit pumped up because it was band day, so you had a bunch of high school kids with instruments in the stands. But I'll say this, I think I agree with you. I was sitting very close to the student section. There was a lot of energy on that side of the field. I thought that overall the in-game experience was good. It was a pretty constant flow of energy throughout. It really never felt like it lulled too badly until about the third quarter. The overall presentation was good. Like, the introduction was nice. There was the coming out to Thunderstruck, and it felt like a little more of an occasion, than. But it was like middle of the afternoon, so you didn't have the full dramatics of coming out at night and things like that.
Well, the thing that I'll say with that, I wrote a note about that. Like, I remember going to the Iowa game where I think they play Back in Black to enter, but it's like you can tell they've been playing that for years,
right?
And everyone's fired up and they know, oh, this is the sound. It's like, Metallica, like Enter Sandman for Mariano Rivera coming in. And I took a note. It's like, this is the problem of kind of a lack of consistency or any real ethos with IU football. Is you have a different song every 2 or 3 years. You have a different intro setup. I'm with you. I also liked the intro. I liked having the video with a minute left, kind of doing the Mets closer horn song. I like all that, but it's like, we need to stick with, again, we need a coach. We need someone to just kind of stay and stick, because all of this stuff is good, but we've done Metallica before. We've done all of these songs before. And they keep changing. And I think fans the only thing that stays is like that stupid first down march and like the up and down arms. Yeah. Like, somehow that won't go away.
And the Jaws theme on third down.
Those will not go away. But I agree with you. I liked it, but it doesn't resonate because it's like, oh, it's always new. And it's like, oh, well, we'll have a new one in 3 years. But anyway, it's just like, that's where we need some consistency with football, but it will come with success. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's a good point. And it's one of those where it does feel like we hit the reset button like every 3 years on the in-stadium experience. So it's like, this time it's going to be better. And it's rarely the problem of the experience itself. It's right. That it never moors to any success on the field. And so you end up, people really get down on the team. They're not there. The atmosphere is bad because of that. And then you got to build it back up again. And so you almost have to do the reset regularly. And I think that'll continue to happen until Indiana just has a 5 or 6 year run where they're successful all the time. And that will really be, I think, the key element as we think about all this moving forward. But I thought for a reopening, I guess.
I agree. Well, they also
it was good.
Walking in the tunnel, which I always think is cool.
Yep. Yeah. It's there's a lot of little quality of life, and there's other things that go on behind the scenes. I think the video board shows are better, just in general. There's some kinks to work out, but they've tried to make the on-field promotions a bit more fun. as fun as you can make on-field promotions. I think on-field promotions, like that was one of those things that like in the 80s and 90s is like, ooh, guess what? We could have people come on the playing surface. And then everybody's tired of it by now. So within what you can do there, it was nice to see.
Well, and then when we were in college, they're like, we can bring people in inflatable mascot costumes, like weird inflatable IU guys. I will say that my 8-year-old hot dog gun is high on his list of things. Like that came out once, and then was like every time out, it's like, are they bringing the hot dog gun back out? Like, when's the hot dog gun coming back out? It's like, I think that's one time only, my friend. Sorry, Gray.
Let's talk about the rest of the stadium, though. A lot of new food options. Did you get a chance to try any of those out?
I didn't. But I did. We walked by a lot of them. I like the quick that right out of our gate 8, they have a quick serve section where you can just grab and go, which is like, hey, this is a great idea for 2017. Like, I'm happy we brought this in. A lot of new vendors that I saw, which was really good. So I like that they're doing that. To me, the quick serve thing was so necessarily needed, just a spot to grab popcorn, hot dogs, drinks, and beers. And they zigzag the lines. It used to be the lines just go straight out on the concourse, which would create this huge mess. They kind of zigzagged them. So a lot of nice little things like that, which I thought were, so no, I was very happy to see all of those things.
Yeah, I found the social cantina tent. That was nice. And got some tacos over there and it was good overall. Like there were all the old favorites are there. There's some new stuff there. Buffalo Louie's has a stand on the concourse area right when you enter on the very north end of the stadium. And that was pretty much hopping the whole time. So it was neat to see all those different options. I will pause for a minute and just remind everybody that we had a great tailgate before the game started. And that was in large part due to being able to enjoy it with Hoosier Game Day Lager, the official beer of IU Athletics from Upland. Hoosier Game Day Lager, sponsor of the podcast as well. And just the iconic, I was in line at Social Cantina, and a woman is coming up to her husband who's in line, who's buying beer, and he's asked, what does she want? And she says, I want the candy stripe can beer. Didn't say Hoosier Game Day Lager. Just said, I want the candy stripe can beer. But you know it when you see it, folks, because it does have that candy stripe pattern on the can. A really delicious, easy drinking Vienna style lager. Absolutely something you need to have at your next tailgate. You can pick up Hoosier Game Day Lager at any of Upland's locations throughout central Indiana. You can also pick up Hoosier Game Day Lager at every Big Red in Bloomington. Pretty much anywhere that you can buy beer within central Indiana, you're going to find Hoosier Game Day Lager. It's also available at the stadium, so be sure to check out Hoosier Game Day Lager next time you're in Memorial Stadium or in the parking lots getting ready to tailgate or out at the bar getting ready to watch an IU game. But no, I was pretty impressed with everything in terms of the lines weren't too bad. Felt like there was a nice traffic flow. I'm over on your side of the stadium now, again, after a long hiatus, and I was pleased with how everything was spaced out. I am interested to see what happens when there's 8,000 more people in the stadium. So that
the thing is, like, everything looks good in these kind of environments. Like, the stress test comes when
Maryland,
Michigan, or Ohio State comes, and you're suddenly pushing the limits. Like, then it seems like that things fray at the end, but we'll see.
Yeah, Maryland is probably because that's parents' weekend. So you're gonna have a ton of people in. Like, it's already, if you haven't bought parking passes, folks, yet for that Maryland game, I wish you a lot of luck. They are really, really expensive even on SeatGeek right now. So keep an eye on that. And as we move forward with look, I like the fact that IU continues to make small but meaningful changes to the way the game day setup is working. That's going to really be what is a key, I think, is adapting to that as they move forward. And it is nice to see so many of the local vendors now in there doing what they're doing. I think that makes a big difference because I think everybody within the IU orbit can agree the standard like IU concessions items are just not good. They're and they haven't been good for a long time. It's nice to have something different and actually tasty in the stadium. I to the point that, like, you know me, like, I do a huge tailgate. We had probably over 100 people that came through the tailgate over the course of the 6 hours we were out there. And I was so intrigued by what was in the stadium from a food perspective, I didn't even bother eating lunch at my own tailgate. A bunch of other people did, but I was like, I really want to try at least something in there. And I'm glad I did. It was nice.
Good for you. Yeah.
So IU, again, 1-0. They'll be taking on We had one or two questions that might be worth getting to. Let me track those down real quick. So Patrick noted it's one game, inevitably, quote, don't want to show too much, but thought run blocking was promising, thought pass protection was concerning, and the Rourke deep ball incomplete data. There's something to be said for that. But Patrick, I guess I'll go back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. A lot of it, I think, is I'm choosing, at least for the moment, to say let's not show too much of the playbook, and also let's work on short and intermediate stuff. The pass protection does need to get better, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see. And I do think that in a game like this where the pass protection isn't working, but the run blocking is working so well, I think they probably just run the ball even more. Like IU almost looked like they put themselves in a position where they were going to be likely to lose yardage because they wanted to see if they could run certain plays. I think if they were actually trying to gain maximum yardage on every play in this game, the play calling likely would have been different. But it's still something that needs to get fixed as we move forward. That's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
I agree with Patrick on the I'm happy you mentioned it. The pass blocking was rough. Like the pocket was never really clean for Rourke. I mean, the positive side is Rourke looks like he's able to move around the pocket very well, and he doesn't get stuck in a spot. He also has kind of a great up and under move to get out of sacks. Like he had 4 or 5 where he's just kind of like just dips down low and then comes back up and gets out of a sack. But it was a very not clean pocket for a team against FIU that I'd like to see that cleaned up a little bit.
Yeah, no, there's so many little things that are going to have to be fixed, but you'd rather be in this position to fix them. And that's really where I think we're at with everything.
Yeah.
And I was wrong. That was the only questions we had. Everything else was about tailgating, and we've already talked about that. So did you tailgated a bit before the game? Anything?
So we came down. I mean, we do not do nothing close to what you do. We are in the MAC of tailgating, and we're not ready to go to the big time conferences. It was great though. A couple of teachers that my wife teaches with also we realized are kind of close by. So we had probably about like 7 to 10 people kind of hanging out around ours. It was fun. We had can jam set up. I had a couple friends walk by, say hi, and the kids brought some chalk. It was awesome. My son took a huge thing and just said, IU tailgate, just come in and chill. So he's writing, letting people know where to come in. It was great. We had a really good time. I had some dogs and brats. I mean, we are definitely doing the small scale, just, bag chips. Not generic. We went with the some really good barbecue. The place out of Pittsburgh. Wise chips, really good.
I'm not familiar with those.
They're good, but not generic. And then also the hint of lime Tostitos, which I'm a big fan of. So no, we had a really good time. It was fun. We had the people are like, we're going to come back, and so I think we're starting to get our little tailgate crew together as well. So we had a great time.
That's great. Well, we're looking forward to more. Of course, coming up this week, a Friday game for IU, a Friday evening kick, which I know is a huge. I will say this. I'm curious from your perspective. First of all, since you come from the north side of Indianapolis, how was the transit yesterday? Like, what was the process like?
The opening of I-69 and 465 was awesome. Like it saved a ton of time. My one thing to anybody with INDOT who's listening, you have a huge ceremony. It's been, I don't know, 50 plus years I've been hearing about 69 connecting to Indy, and 3 years of getting this last section figured out. And they had a huge ribbon cutting ceremony. So I'm excited. Like we turned the music down, like, all right, kids, like we're going to I had not driven it yet. Like super excited. We get there. It's like 2-lane exit, but of course 1 lane has cones on it. And it's already 1 lane shut down. And it's like, I've been waiting 3 years from this. Like if you're going to open it, just open it. Like open the whole thing. If it's not ready to be open, then just don't open it yet. Like why is 1 lane already closed on this exit? So it was like jammed up and there was a little bit of a backup getting off. But that said, it made, from my house up here in Westfield, once I got on Meridian, there was not a stoplight or a stop until I got to Bloomington, which was just awesome. So it shaved, from up here in Westfield, I plug into Waze. It's like an hour and 9 minutes to Memorial Stadium from my house. So it shaved a good 30, 35 minutes off the route. Getting out wasn't bad. We left with probably about like 4 minutes to go in the game. So we missed, and I think the stadium was kind of clearing organically as the game went along. So there wasn't a big traffic. We'll see about how it is getting out. But, getting out again, you just get on 69, you're good to go. So no, the drive for anybody up here who's been, thrown off by the traffic or the construction on I-69, it is done. And you're free to go, and you're doing 80 miles an hour all the way down. And it's awesome.
Yeah, I thought overall, I mean, I got there so early, and and we ended up leaving with the kids got horrifically sunburned. That was the one downside to yesterday was I didn't think about, hey, the clouds are out. Typical Indiana stuff, right? Like, I have no idea. It's a very, very Indy 500 kind of thing. So we left a little bit early, but yeah, the setup, at least in Bloomington, was good. But I was curious how your experience and the experience of people leaving were like, because you're going to deal with that on Friday, obviously, coming down for the game and then trying to get out. So I'll be curious to see how it is there. But good to see at least most of an open interstate between here in Indianapolis, and long overdue after 5 decades of this or whatever it's been.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 10 years of actual construction and then another 40 years of talking about it. It's nice to finally have it done. And the exit out is I mean, they're going to take some time getting that workway figured out, but it's open. It's nice.
Anyway, we will have coming up later this week, we'll have some content related to IU taking on Western Illinois, a game that will mean a lot for the season in terms of they win that game and they will be 33% to bowl eligibility. And I mean,
no, it's true. It's
true.
Those are numbers. Those are real numbers.
Yes. But also just a way for this team to continue to improve itself and a way to get I think a clearer handle on who we can count on in this season and who's going to go out there and give effort regardless of the level of the opponent. Like, is this a team that ends up having trouble with taking their foot off the gas? There was a little bit of an implication of that from Cignetti yesterday when it came to like the way his team approached the end of the first half and then most of the second half. And this whole idea of you got to learn how to play with the lead. They're going to have the lead a lot against Western Illinois. We'll see what they do with it there. We'll see how they're able to improve. As we know, you only get one more week of this, and then you're in conference play and you're on the road. So a lot to learn in a short period of time.
That on the road game, you and I are both going to be there.
True.
So our schedule might get a little bit jacked up that week because that is it's a long trip. But I will also say, talking to a lot of people before the game, a couple people during the game, there's excitement about that UCLA game, and a couple people I know are going. A lot of people I talked to that I told them I was going, like, damn, I wish I could go. Like, I was really looking at it. Like, I think the energy is real, and I continue to say I think the turnout there is going to exceed expectations as the Indiana crowd in Pasadena. But that'll be a really, really interesting first test. But the interest around this, 2 years ago, I don't think you're getting anybody to fly to California to see IU football. And now most people I talk to, they're either going or they're really bummed they're not.
Yeah. It should be fun. And I mean, I keep hearing there's going to be a ton of people out there, but we'll talk more about that the following week, but it is interesting to think about how much is going to happen with IU football over the next 4 weeks with
12 days.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, that'll wrap it up for us. We appreciate you folks joining. We appreciate the folks at Home Field Apparel for sponsoring, and we will be back later on in this week. You'll be able to catch Crimson Cast preview shows throughout the course of the week. Also, be sure to check out Bite Size Bison and the entire Back Home Network. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. So long, everybody. Goodbye, YouTube.